of Question Time. David.
Good evening. The full horror of Tuesday's terrorist attacks is still sinking in as more and more gruesome details are being reported. Several hundred Britons are now feared dead, and the question on many people's minds is how the United States should respond and what role the United Kingdom and the NATO allies should play in that response. Arguments range from mounting all-out war against terrorists and those who harbour them, on the one hand, and on the other, examining the whole American strategy in the Middle East. So, with us here tonight to discuss these issues, Lord Ashdown, the former leader of the Liberal Democrats, Philip Lader, who's the American ambassador here until February this year, he served 4 years, Tam Dalyell, Father of the House, the longest-serving member and a critic of Western policy towards the Middle East, and Yasmin Alabai-Brown, columnist for The Independent, and of course our Question Time audience are going to be putting the questions tonight. And the first one comes from Wale Bakari, who's an administrator. Mr. Bakari.
Thank you. Good evening. My question to former Ambassador Lader. In the midst of this carnage, won't a harder response provoke more? Won't a harder response provoke more action which will affect innocent lives?
So a hard response will provoke more violence. I'll come to Mr. Lader in a moment. Paddy Ashdown, what's your answer to that?
Yes, it could. And I think that's a matter we have to bear very carefully in mind. I mean, one thing is clear. After Tuesday, nothing is ever going to be the same again. The era of the superpower, alone, invincible and inviolate, has gone. We're now into the era of globalized power and globalized terror to match it, and the extent to which we are able to combat this will be measured by the extent to which we are able to act internationally and multilaterally, not unilaterally. The second point is the one you identify precisely, Mr. Bakari. If we mishandle this, I fear it's not impossible to see this as the first in a chain of events that leads to war between nations, maybe not ourselves, but certainly in the regions that are affected. And we need to bear in mind one fact when deciding what to do. And that fact is this: what was the aim of the terrorists? The aim of the terrorists was to provoke us into overreaction in exactly the same way as Israel has been provoked into overreaction by suicide bombers in their cities. And to provoke us into deepening the instability in those areas that they want to see war and conflict. And the extent to which our actions result in that outcome will be the extent to which they continue to win and we continue to lose.
But isn't there a danger of that happening, do you believe?
Well, intemperate action. I mean, Ambassador Lader said today that he hoped that his government, he believed his government, would act in a measured, proportionate, and precisely targeted way. And I hope that is right. In this sense, this is a war for all of us. I don't like the overuse of the word war, incidentally. But this is a conflict for all of us, and one we must win. And in this sense, the United States and the United States President now acts as a leader, not just for the United States, but for the whole world.
Right.
The most precious asset that we have is that coalition of revulsion that has now sprung up across the world, including in places where are not normally allies for the United States, and that must be maintained.
Right, I'll get to the man at the back there with spectacles. I want to get as many people as I can in our brief time. You, sir.
The problem I'm having is this: you keep using the word war. Who are you fighting with? This Lambardin, or whatever his name was, is not an head of state of any country. He's a Saudi Arabian who live in Afghanistan.
So if we're declaring war, who is the war against?
Who are you going to be killing?
Innocent
people.
Philip Lader.
I want to respond to both questions if I can. I think there's great truth in your point. As Paddy suggested, that it is my view, just as one citizen, that the response must be purposeful, measured, and proportionate. The difficulty is we should not, even though the Secretary of State has indicated who the leading candidate as culprit might be, we should not rush to judgment until it's established with certainty who is to blame. But at that point, not simply as an act of retribution, but also as a means of prevention of further atrocities, the United States, I believe as a citizen, should take appropriate, measured, purposeful, and proportionate responsive
But those
action.
adjectives are all fine, but what do they actually mean in terms of what you do?
That has to be determined once you decide what the target is.
Would you rule
what is the
anything
group?
out? I mean, do you rule out an invasion of Afghanistan? Would you be prepared to see that? Land troops in Afghanistan?
The advice given to our president will be across this entire range. Those who are motivated by anger or believe that a huge volume of response is necessary, to those who believe that simply a law-abiding judiciary proceeding is what's appropriate.
Okay.
But I believe, though, I must say, that with the seasoned veterans surrounding this president, we are most likely to have what is a deliberative, rational process of determining that response.
Yes, Mr. Brown. Do you think that can be achieved?
I'm not sure. I think some of the rhetoric that is coming out, and of course it's understandable. I mean, what has happened is impossible to cope with, even as from this distance. But I think there are certain things that Americans, and I do make a distinction between America and Americans, I think Americans are going to have to look at a lot of new realities. I have been stunned by the way Americans are so shocked at how many people really truly detest them around the world. I think this is something that should worry all of us, right? I think in part, as you know, some groups have demonized Americans as much as
Right.
Americans have demonized us.
But for what you're saying, so I want to come to
so
hold on a second. We're going to come to that in a moment.
But what
Can you just answer the specific question about action and whether it's
but
possible
the action has
to have
got
action?
to take these facts into account. You can't just go up there and storm. I think you have to be measured and accurate, but also some of these lessons have got to be talked about before any action
Do you
is
think there
taken.
should be any military action of any kind, or would you prefer to see nothing
Once
done?
we really know, yes, I think some action will have to be taken.
The woman in pink there. Can't hear you, sorry.
The panel's briefly talked about America wanting to establish blame before they actually take action. But how long does the panel think Americans will wait before blame is established?
Tam Diel.
Well, in the case of Lockerbie, blame takes a very long time. But you know, if innocent people are killed just because of a feeling that we must do something, that will make the situation worse and not better. If innocent people are killed, there is one group who will be delighted: Bin Laden and his like. And why? Because Arab sympathy, genuine Arab sympathy with the United States, will simply evaporate when there is innocent, gratuitous loss of life, collateral damage, or call it what you will.
All right, I'll take a point from the woman in the third row from the back there, and then I'm going to move on to the next question. You, madam.
What scares me about the use of the word war at the moment is the grim task of counting the dead is still not finished in America. How can we, as a democratic nation, justify killing other mothers, fathers, children of another nation?
Let me ask quite simply if anybody in the audience disagrees with that point of view and believes America should act and act swiftly. You, sir, on the left here.
Americans that have been innocently killed with Tam Diel, you'll always come on the side of the terrorists and have done for years.
That I refute. I simply point out that when President Bush says that this is the first war of the 21st century, it's not so. A war has been going on for 10 years of the daily bombing of Iraq. Now, maybe it's the brothers and sisters of these people who are the recruits that evil men like Bin Laden like to exploit. These are very unpalatable facts. They'd better be addressed.
Okay, the man in the front row here.
I think the reason why there's British and American pilots are risking their lives is to defend the Kurds of northern Iraq and to defend the Shia Muslims of southern Iraq who are in danger from Saddam Hussein We remember Halabja, and I think we should thank the Americans for defending Muslims, not only in Iraq, but also in Kosovo. No. The Americans are defending Muslims in Iraq, they're defending Muslims in Kosovo. They set up the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinians don't have an authority. They defended the Muslims in Kuwait.
Let him finish his point.
Don't you dare speak about the Muslims. You have no idea.
Why don't you attack the Russians?
Don't even speak.
Why don't you attack the Russians when they launched an all-out assault on the Chechens based on a terrorist outreach? I never heard you.
Okay,
I never heard you.
All right, hold on.
The left is silent when it comes to Russia. It's silent when it comes to Russia. It's silent when it comes to Chinese persecution.
You've made your point. You've made your point. Wait, no. Will you be quiet? Will you be quiet? Would you like? It's all right. Would you like just to make your point?
Arab and Muslim colleagues. I'm an Anglo-Arab, born and raised in Britain, and we never condone violence or killings of Americans or Brits. We don't. Our friends are being killed. In New York, we have friends, we have relatives being killed, and we've been also victims of attacks. I mean, from Sudan to Libya to Afghanistan. So we, more than anyone else, and in Palestine, know what it means to be killed.
Okay, I get it. I want to take.
So I don't appreciate this gentleman with the
all right.
American tie.
You've made your point.
Thank you.
I want to have a question from Charles Fenwick, who's a facilities operator, to take this argument on. Mr. Fenwick.
Good evening. Paddy spoke of the dangers of overreacting. Does the panel think that Britain should join America in whatever course of action America now takes?
Philip Lader.
I will come back to that in a moment.
Well, why not answer it straight?
I'll answer it straight then. Whatever. He's a terrific moderator, isn't he?
Wonderful man.
For the Prime Minister to have stepped forward forthrightly and immediately in solidarity with the United States is something which we Americans not only appreciate, but is very meaningful. For Lord Robertson and NATO to have taken the action to demonstrate the profound consensus, what we're starting to see is the marshaling of public opinion by President Bush around the world. But I want to say in that context, in response to your point, I know of no religion or no nationality that has a monopoly on fanaticism. And it is a huge error. It is a colossal error for any of us to identify the acts or potential acts of fanatics with the people at large.
Philip, can I just say that in the last 2 or 3 days it has been rather astonishing and depressing to watch Mr. Rubin, for example, talking in a language of civilization that it was absolutely not acceptable. You know, the man who blew up the Oklahoma bomb was American and very uncivilized. And I don't think it helps to have somebody saying again and again, repeatedly, that the civilized live in the United States and the rest of the world is
hold on,
very bad.
People may not know, Mr. Rubin, but the Foreign Secretary Jack Straw said that this was an attack on civilization. You don't like him saying
I don't like it. I think Tony Blair has been brilliant, measured, very careful not to say that kind of thing. And I think he's done very well as a result.
The lady in blue, who's Anglo-Arab, raised the question of the Sudan. Do you remember that there was the attack on the El Shifa factory, supposedly a chemical warfare factory? It turned out to be nothing of the kind, and the attack was a huge error. Doesn't that teach us that we ought to be very certain before launching military action against a specific place?
All right. Paddy Ashdown, if I could bring you back to the question. The question was whether Britain should stand with America in whatever course of action America now takes.
I suppose you'd admonish me if I answer any of the others as well, but I'll come back to that in a second. The answer to the question, should Britain back any action of the United States, is obviously no. Nor are we required to do so. My view is that so far President Bush has handled this with very considerable skill and a very great degree of rationality, and I hope that's what will continue. Britain's role, however, has been absolutely vital, I think, in that's what will continue. Britain's role, however, has been absolutely vital, I think, in, as Phil said, helping and encouraging that process. I think personally that it was right that NATO should invoke Article 5 of the NATO Constitution for the first time ever, because the fear in this was that what the United States might do was retreat into isolationism and unilateral action. And by showing the United States there was an alternative way forward, we actually opened up the possibility of a multilateral reaction, international reaction to this, which, as Phil has said, is beginning to grow across the world. And that is the most valuable asset that we have. But, and it's a very big but, the provisions of NATO, the principles of NATO, are twofold. One is solidarity, but the other is consultation. And with the solidarity that we have expressed comes the right to expect consultation. NATO says we stand together, but we consult together first. And provided that principle is followed, and we use the NATO solidarity to grow and maintain the wider asset that we have of support across the world, I think it is possible, let us at least entertain the thought, that what happens is that we do not have to use military action. But in effect, these people are given up to the best solution, which is that they should stand trial before the eyes of the world in a court of justice.
But you're assuming then that you're saying that America shouldn't act unless there's unanimity in NATO.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that. It is open to America or any coalition to act in preservation of their own self-defense if they wish to do so. And I want to make it clear that although I believe it is not impossible, if we hold together that international consensus to make sure that these people suffer the penalty in a court of law, I do not exclude from future action the possibility of direct, targeted, precise military action, provided the evidence is there to make sure that it is at the right target, provided it is precisely targeted, and provided it carries the support of the majority of the consensus of nations who would support it.
Now, thank you. I want to bring in a number of people now on what you think Britain should do and the degree to which you would like to see Britain supporting the American administration. There's the man in the green shirt there over on the left.
Britain has considerable experience with anti-terrorism measures from its period in Northern Ireland, where in the early 90s the government opened clandestine links with the IRA to establish a dialogue. Does anyone on the panel think there's any merit in the Americans or any other Western country attempting to open a dialogue with someone, perhaps through Arab embassies or governments, with whoever has perpetrated this atrocity, to find out what is at the root of it and to try and resolve it by negotiated dialogue rather than just brute force and perhaps ignorance?
Philip Lady, would you take that one?
I think it is mandatory that the President leave every option open to him and to the country. And so I would not exclude that necessarily. Would that be popular in public opinion in America today? Certainly not. But I think the President, as Patty has indicated, has adroitly demonstrated that the response will be taking some time and be the result of a deliberative process in which no option currently is excluded.
The man in the green shirt, I'll come to him. The man in the green shirt there.
Yeah, also, I think Britain should back America 100%. America has done everything in this world right. They defend democracy. They do. America is the right country forward. They defend this world. Let's have trouble. America goes in first. Europe's cowards. Europe does nothing. Look at Britain and America, the tie we have. You get these terrorists running around destroying half us, and they come to England to live.
So you would support any action that President Bush decided to take, and think that the British government should support him?
Totally.
Yes. And what action actually would you like to see taken?
Once you find out who it is, I think they should go in hard and take him out. I think it's the only answer. No, they should. Okay. They should take him out.
Our friend in the green shirt who urged dialogue is spot on. Because if you want to avoid another tragedy like Manhattan, you've got to enter into dialogue. If there's massive retaliation, sure as nuts, it'll happen again.
Okay, let's go to the man over here, if we can reach him on the right here. You, sir, with the pullover. Yeah. I'll come to you in a minute.
I think terrorism is a global problem, and there has to be a global solution.
That is right.
It's very clear to me that there's a need for retribution as well for the American people, but I would say that the solution has to be a global one. And given the history of America taking unilateral action to solve global problems, I think it's important that from here onwards, seeing that we have a different world situation, there should be a global response. World leaders should also step up to the plate and take an equal part in solving this.
Yeah, okay. The man in the yellow, pull over there, you sir. Yes.
Directly on a point raised importantly by Lord Ashdown, I want to know with what right, or at least with what consistency, can George W. Bush avail himself of Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty of 1949, when even this year he has specifically dismissed, for being 30 years old, the ABM Treaty as being irrelevant to USA's needs? I hope that wasn't too complicated.
I'm not sure the two are connected, and I'm bound to say that it won't make me popular with you and perhaps with others as well, that I'm not sure the ABM Treaty isn't being eroded by events anyway, and we need to think of other ways of preserving our peace. I mean, neither the ABM Treaty nor the new missile defense would have prevented what happened on Thursday, and I very much agree with the gentleman down here. We are moving into the era of globalized power. Globalized capitalism, globalized satellite broadcasting, globalized crime, globalized drug, globalized terrorism. And unless we are prepared to move to where that power has gone, to have globalized institutions and globalized governance and a global system of tackling terrorism, we will never tackle it. Okay. And that is the important point.
All right, Patty.
It has to be globalized. At the moment, everything we call globalized is actually in the control of America and Europe. It has got to now. It has got to now. America has now joined the real world in a very horrible way. But we have to now, the hubris of the US, this idea that America is the greatest country in the world, that has to be placed into the modern reality. We all have to share this space. And there cannot be real globalization while certain countries strut about thinking they're better than everybody else.
Hold on, Paddy. I'm going to bring you down here now. What were you saying? You interrupted. I didn't hear what you said.
The strongest economy, and they're saying that they're the best in the world and everything else. Well, they certainly weren't on Tuesday. And I think the reality is that we all have to wake up to the fact that, yes, there is global terrorism now, and how do we deal with it? But ultimately, we have to stand with America as to what's happened to them. Not once on this programme has it been mentioned that tens of thousands of people were killed on Tuesday.
No,
and the reality is with it is the
That's
Americans
not
are
true.
faced.
I started by saying
although we've had some 20 years of this, it has been minor in comparison to what happened on Tuesday. And really we should gain some sense of reality, not just what happened in America, but what is going to happen again via a train, via a bus or whatever. And I think we need to grab a sense of that as well.
Sure.
Okay. I want to take another specific question from Ian Tunstead, who's a marketing manager. This is about the specifics. Let's get back to the specifics now of what should be done. Ian Tunstead.
If the Taliban do not hand over Osman bin Laden for trial, should the Allies then attack Afghanistan?
Okay, assuming that the Americans decide they have evidence against bin Laden and he's not handed over, should the Allies invade Afghanistan to capture him? Tamdiel?
It depends on whether there would be agreement, for example, from Pakistan. Without Pakistan bases, it would be extremely difficult to do so in that mountainous, difficult terrain where the Russians came to such grief. There are the practicalities of it, and it certainly couldn't be done without killing many tens of thousands of innocent people.
Okay.
Can I just remind you?
Yes.
The same thing applied very much to America on Tuesday when tens of thousands of people's lives were put at risk. And in addition to that, and what seems to have been forgotten by this panel, when we're asked if we should support America, is this, that we also have lost something like 500 people, innocent people, that had nothing to do with this at all. And if it's a question of whether we should support America in being able to take action in response to that, then I'm for supporting America. And yes, let's take the rest of the world with us, but let's not forget that our people have been killed, irrespective of everybody else around this world.
And what should the object? And what should the object of our reaction be? Surely the prime object is to do everything we can to stop it happening again. Everybody in this room feels for those Americans. But
do you want to come back on that?
Yeah.
Well, yes, I think anybody would want this kind of work and danger and damage and sick pain being caused to anybody throughout the world But what you've also got to remember, you are referring to things that happened 20-odd years ago. How far have we actually got in this world today with stopping terrorism? And what action or what plans are there for the future, for this world, if you like, for every country that there is, to be involved in it? Do you honestly believe that people in the eastern countries will sit round a table and discuss these issues without some kind of action being taken?
It's not 20 years ago.
All right, you've been
it was Arabs in the first place.
No.
Don't talk about nation. That is why we all have this problem. James Ruby maybe.
What? No, you've got the camera now. You've been trying to get on for some time.
No. Equal
please.
opportunity.
I'm asking a question.
This is the blunder you all do. You see, only 1/4 of the population is the Western civilization. James Rubin has got distinction, but does he know about Indus Valley civilization? That more than that, everything was destroyed. That is how you rule the world now.
Okay. I go to the man at the back, on the third row from the back. Yes, you.
I think the ball is firmly in the court of the Taliban government. I mean, they know where Bin Laden is. They know where he's doing. It's their obligation. If they want to have any sort of respect, they should have handed him over years ago. But it's their obligation to hand him over now. And if they do not, and I shouldn't hear that they can't, because they certainly can. If they do not, then they should be prepared to suffer the consequences. Now, that should not mean the slaughtering of innocent women and children. We've had enough of that already. But they should have it. They should hand them over immediately. Otherwise, they have to be prepared to face the consequences. Because I mean hard.
Okay. Do you agree with that?
I think the whole Taliban regime needs to be looked at, and we need to look at what's going on to what's being done to the people of Afghanistan there as well. It's not just one man and what he's done to the Americans. We have ignored what's been going on in Afghanistan for a long time. So I agree with you. We have to take some action. But there is a lot more going on in Afghanistan than just this one man.
Go on.
And I think one of the things that worries me is that in this whole very emotional period that we are only going to end up talking about what happened in the United States and not look at what Taliban is doing to its own people. That is also important.
But his point, we'll come back to him in a moment, is that if the Taliban won't hand over Bin Laden, then force is legitimately used against the Taliban.
Yes, or sanctions or whatever it takes, yes.
Force, including force.
Yes.
Yes, all right. Do you want to come back on it?
I mean, she says sanctions. Well, I'm sorry, we're going to have to get a bit sterner than that, because they should have handed him over years ago, because he did a bomb 2 years ago or 3 years ago.
Well,
they should
they've
have
been
handed him over
propped
then.
up.
And if it takes...
Taliban has been supported by American businessmen. We have to look at that.
I want to take a question from Nick Halpin, who's a law student. Mr. Halpin.
Does the bombing in America represent a failure in US foreign policy, with millions and millions of people all around the world despising the American nation?
Philip Labour.
I'll respond to the last several questions as I respond to you. President Bush has made it clear that once it is determined with certainty who is to blame, that any nation which harbors such individuals shall also be held accountable. I think he has been very clear. I would add to that, however, that in the context of an analysis, not only of technical intelligence matters, of transportation security, but of fundamental foreign policy in the coming weeks and months, certainly, as you suggest, Jasmine, we must be reflective on why there are these attitudes towards the United States. But if I may,
let him speak.
But if I may,
he's saying what you're saying.
But
I think. Well, all right.
I'll
bring you in.
May I continue?
If you listen to him, I'll bring you in. All right.
But that is not a justification for any individual around this globe to celebrate what we've seen as the utter disregard for the sanctity of human life.
Can I please? Let me just say something, because I feel so strongly about that. If it's wrong to demonize Muslims, it is equally wrong to demonize Americans. And I think it has become a sport, and we shouldn't allow this pain to sanction that kind of behavior. I think we all have to be reflective.
Are you saying it's not, then, a failure in American foreign policy?
It is.
That's led to this kind of action?
I think both sides. I think it's absolutely right for Americans to look at why they are despised and look at themselves. But it's also very important for Muslims and others who too easily talk about the Americans as if, there's this block thing that we are allowed to despise. That is wrong too.
Okay. I said I'd come to you, yes? No, I said I'd come to the gentleman.
It's wrong too.
Okay. I said I'd come to you, yes? No, I said I'd come to the gentleman.
It's very, very important that the events that took place on Tuesday result in America waking up to their policies in the Middle East. Now, it's not saying that that justifies what took place. No one is saying that justifies it. But America, for God's sake, wake up to what you are doing in the Middle East. And when you wake up, then you will solve the problem and you will prevent what happened on Tuesday. And that's the only way, really, to do that.
Paddy Ashdown? Paddy Ashdown?
Well, yeah, I mean, the truth is that I suppose it is a result of that. But let's just reflect. And I mean, I speak as somebody who has been pretty critical in the past about many aspects of American foreign policy. But the Americans have put themselves out front. They are the people who have tried to arbitrate peace. I don't say they've done everything properly and right in the Middle East. There have been, hang on. There have been, and I don't condone every action they've taken, nevertheless, in the front line of seeking to negotiate peace in various areas, not least, for instance, in Bosnia. So, of course, they haven't been right all the time. But let us accept that one of the reasons why they are in the front line for terrorists who do not believe in democracy, who do not believe in liberty, who want to overturn the rule of law, is precisely because the United States has been in the front line of fighting in favor of those things. And let's at least understand that. David, there is another point I wish to make directly in relation to the gentleman down here. And I speak as somebody who's fought in 4 terrorist campaigns against terrorists, including one in my own country in Northern Ireland. I know one thing is absolutely certain. If you play the terrorist game by being provoked into overreaction, you do not defeat terrorism, you grow terrorism. And that is why, at this stage, what we have to do is act very carefully and very precisely. Look, here is the bottom line. There is no defense against the determined terrorist. There is no defense against the determined terrorist who will wishes to pay with their lives. The moment that person has left their terrorist camp, armed with the will to die and the weapons of mass destruction, stopping him is a matter chiefly of luck. There is only one way you can cope with this, and that is that you make it under international law illegal for a nation to harbor or give succor to terrorism. Now, if out of this comes a Geneva Convention, which is against giving succor to terrorism, an international instrument, that is the way you squeeze this problem off and kill it at its source. And that's the action we have to take, which is why this gentleman is right.
I want to go to the woman in the 4th row there. Yes, you.
Mentioned that when President Bush talked about the terrorists and those that harbor them, did he and the American government consider the fact that the world, one of the reasons why the world despises America, because it sees Israel as a terrorist and America as one who harbors Israel as a terrorist? That should be considered. I'm talking about foreign policy again.
Phil Leder. Phil Leder, would you like to answer that point?
I have to share with you that I find it hurtful that one could suggest that a majority of the world despise the United States. My parents were immigrants to the United States. And I have to tell you that we have fought as a people and as a nation, as Patty suggests, for the rule of law. And I simply want to say that it saddens me how it's possible on this night, within 48 hours, that one, because of the intensity of feeling on policy issues, can frankly abstract ourselves from the senseless human victimization and suffering that has occurred before us.
I just want to point out that it's not true that we don't feel anything, but I think everyone will admit that within hours of this catastrophe, it's the American government that started talking about war, started talking about culprits, I'm sorry, if the American government was so concerned about casualties, I'm sorry, the government made me think about these things because they brought it up on public TV.
The woman on your left, 2 away from you.
But I'm sorry, there's 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 casualties of war.
Let her answer your point. You made
Buried
it.
under rubble. Who didn't realise this was going to happen? They were going to work. They were normal people. They didn't understand.
500 children in Iraq every month.
I'm sorry. And is it an eye for an eye? Does it make it any better? It doesn't.
talking about war, like he
Let's
said.
leave it. All right.
I'm taking a plane.
Listen,
Is an American life more worth than
No,
Iran?
no life is worth it.
Listen,
No
there is
life
no
and no
way...
religion.
Will you take the microphone away, please? There is no way that you can argue with each other with one microphone. We can't hear what you're saying. People at home can't hear what you're saying. So we'll bring an end to it. And I come to the gentleman here in the pale blue shirt. You, sir.
Hi, I had a different comment to make, but after
Right,
all,
make it.
I want to make this comment that, you know, what I fear is most of all is that people will start turning against each other, Christians, Muslims. It's happening in this room right now, and that is what we have to fight. We can't fight terrorists with guns or bombs. We have to fight terrorism. We have to fight it at its roots. We have to fight poverty. We have to fight racism. We have to fight what's going on in this room. That's what we have to fight.
Okay. And the man in red there. You, sir. Yes, you, sir.
I think the trouble is that we keep talking about the symptoms. Well, I think the cause of all this is because the American almighty dollar keeps wanting to spread the American way to every single country.
And all right, but leave that. What is the action you think the American government should take?
It's got to talk. I mean, it's very easy to go be Rambo. Let's be Rambo. Go in and send in Bruce Willis and kill everybody. It's absolutely ridiculous. You've got to talk. Find out what these people are really thinking.
Okay, the man behind there. You, sir.
I mean, why are there warships in the Persian Gulf?
Say again, what?
I said, why are there warships in the Persian Gulf already? I thought innocent until proven guilty.
And the man there on the right. You, sir, with your hand up. No, this man here in the white shirt. No, you, yes, you in the black tie.
Well, I think it's appalling that I think it's just appalling that you're all supporting terrorists, and that I think that none of you, hold on a minute, that none of us.
I don't think you've been listening. I don't think you've been listening.
No,
if you
just
think
one
that.
minute. None of us would be able to sit here and express our views as freely as we do if it wasn't for the sacrifices made by British and American servicemen over the years.
Yes.
And I think that's a very important point. And this has become...
Africans, Muslims,
Sure, but we have values. The point I'm making is
what do you want to see the American administration and the British government do at this point?
I don't think there's anyone in this room who would want a disproportionate response, because that would bring us down to their level, which is not what we want to do. But that doesn't mean that we can negotiate, as Tandiel says. There's no negotiation with terrorists, and some people ask, what do these people really want? There's been a declaration of war by Osama bin Laden and other people against America. I'm sorry, he did... Hold on a second.
Hold on, let him... no, don't shout him down.
Hold on a second.
Don't shout him down. You had your say. Let him just finish the
there is
sentence.
a conflict of values between our values, which we should prize and defend if we have to, which is freedom under the law, Paddy Ashdown was saying it, sanctity for human life, and respect for other people. And there are other people here in this room. But go to many countries around the world, like Iraq and so on, where you cannot express yourself freely.
All right.
Now, we're defending that freedom.
All right, we have to stop. Our time is up. And my apologies to those of you who haven't been able to get in, but my thanks to you for coming. My thanks to all the panel here. It ends this special edition of Question Time. You can carry on the debate on our website. The address is there on the screen if you'd like to. And you can take part in Question Time. Call the number there. We're going to be in Leeds next week, 10:35, here on BBC One. Until then, from all of us here, good night.
There's a panorama special on Osama bin Laden, the world's most wanted man. The truth behind the main suspect in the attack on America is on Sunday at 10:15 here on BBC One.
This Saturday, the BBC's Last Night of the Proms will be presenting a revised program.